Imagine a world where the greatest maritime power of the early modern age was not a European kingdom, but a vast Eastern empire. In the early 15th century, Ming China projected prestige, diplomacy, and naval power across the Indian Ocean. In our timeline, that moment faded. In this alternate timeline, a world of speculation, not history, the fleets never stopped sailing. Image_shorts_1, a lone Ming sailor seen from behind, standing at the stern of a large wooden treasure ship, sunset reflecting on the sea, distant coastline on the horizon, emotional atmospheric vertical composition, no readable text, 9:16. Image_shorts_2, two robed Ming court scholars seen from behind, walking toward an immense palace gate under warm dawn light, their figures small against the grand architecture, vertical composition, no readable text, 9:16. Image_shorts_3, extreme close-up of a weathered Ming maritime porcelain shard resting on dark silk cloth, blue and white glazed detail, warm studio lighting, no readable inscription, vertical macro composition, 9:16. The Ming treasure voyages, led by Admiral Zheng He between 1405 and 1433, were among the greatest maritime expeditions of their age. They carried gifts, envoys, soldiers, interpreters, merchants, and imperial authority from Southeast Asia to India, Arabia, and the East African coast. But the question remains, what if these voyages became permanent policy? Image_shorts_1, a silhouetted Ming admiral figure seen from behind on the deck of a treasure ship, looking across a misty ocean toward distant foreign shores, vertical cinematic composition, no readable text, 9:16. Image_shorts_2, two figures seen from behind, one Ming merchant and one East African trader, exchanging goods in a bustling Indian Ocean port market, warm daylight, vertical composition, no readable text, 9:16. Image_shorts_3, extreme close-up of polished black lacquered wood with subtle gold cloud patterns, bronze maritime fitting nearby, warm directional light, no readable text, vertical macro composition, 9:16. This is not only a story about ships, it is a story about policy, prestige, trade, and the choice between turning inward and remaining at sea. If the Ming court had kept its oceanic system alive, the age of exploration might not have belonged mainly to Europe. It might have opened under a different sky. Image_shorts_1, a traditional Ming harbor filled with wooden junks and treasure ships, seen from a nearby hill rather than from the air, small silhouetted figures moving on docks, vertical composition, no readable text, 9:16. Image_shorts_2, two Ming coastal guards seen from behind at a stone sea fortress, watching choppy waters and distant ships under cloudy light, vertical composition, no readable text, 9:16. Image_shorts_3, extreme close-up of ancient crimson silk fabric with subtle golden embroidered cloud and wave motifs, tactile fibers visible, warm studio lighting, no readable text, vertical macro composition, 9:16. The story begins in the early 15th century. Ming China had emerged from the fall of the Yuan and built a powerful imperial order. Nanjing remained central to the early Ming world, while the Yongle Emperor elevated Beijing into a new political heart. Court ritual, examination culture, military command, and enormous state resources all converged under imperial rule. Into this world sailed Zheng He, a Muslim eunuch admiral, trusted by the Yongle Emperor. His fleets were not simple trading ventures. They were floating instruments of diplomacy, ceremony, trade supervision, and imperial display. Across the Indian Ocean, rulers encountered not private adventurers, but the visible weight of a great state. Yet the voyages were costly and politically contested. Scholar officials questioned the expense and moral purpose of distant expeditions, while maritime eunuch officials defended the prestige and security benefits of the sea. After Yongle, the court faced a real choice: reduce the fleets or turn them into a permanent arm of policy. In this alternate timeline, the Xuande Emperor chooses continuity. Instead of allowing the final voyages to become an ending, he creates a maritime directorate, a permanent institution responsible for patrols, diplomacy, shipyards, interpreters, charts, tribute missions, and overseas warehouses. The sea becomes policy, not spectacle. The fleets continue, but they change. Zheng He's successors cannot rely on one towering personality alone. They build systems, rotating admirals, trained navigators, standardized ship repair, coastal intelligence, and diplomatic protocols for ports from Malacca to Calicut and beyond. Ming presence expands cautiously. Instead of full colonial conquest, the court develops treaty warehouses, protected anchorages, seasonal depots, and supervised trade compounds at key points of the Indian Ocean. Malacca, Calicut, Hormuz, Aden, and East African ports become nodes in a denser Ming maritime web. Local rulers do not become puppets overnight. Some welcome Ming protection as a shield against rivals. Others resent the new oversight. The tribute system remains ritualized, but it now gains a practical edge. Access to convoy protection, commercial privilege, repair yards, and imperial arbitration. By the late 15th century, the Ming Oceanic Network is no longer a memory of Zheng He's era. It is a functioning maritime order. Trade routes across the South China Sea, Bay of Bengal, Arabian Sea, and Swahili coast are watched, taxed, negotiated, and protected by a system Europe has not yet entered. This system does not close the Indian Ocean. It changes who sets the terms. Gujarati, Arab, Malay, Javanese, Tamil, Persian, Swahili, and Chinese merchants still trade, but more of that trade now passes through Ming-recognized channels. The sea remains cosmopolitan, but the hierarchy is clearer. Some ports thrive under convoy protection. Others find themselves isolated if they refuse the new order. The Ming court learns that sea power is not only ships. It is insurance, grain supply, repair rights, customs collection, hostage diplomacy, and the ability to make merchants choose safer routes. Then Europe arrives. In 1498, Vasco da Gama reaches India by sea in our timeline. In this alternate world, Portuguese captains still round Africa, but they do not find an open path to domination. They find a vast Asian maritime order already guarded, negotiated, and armed. The first encounters are unsettling. Portuguese envoys expect to bargain with local rulers. Instead, they face local courts, backed by Ming interpreters, garrisons, patrol ships, and written protocols they cannot easily bypass. The Europeans have entered someone else's system. The Portuguese do not retreat immediately. They probe the network, test weaker ports, and search for a choke point. Their strategy remains familiar. Seize a harbor, fortify it, control trade, and force local rulers to accept their terms. But the Ming network is watching. The flashpoint comes at Malacca. In our history, Malacca became a key target for Portuguese expansion in 1511. In this alternate timeline, it is not an exposed sultanate standing alone. It is the central hinge of a Ming-backed maritime order. A Portuguese commander demands privileged access, fortification rights, and freedom from Ming-supervised customs. The Ming admiral offers a different bargain. Trade, under regulation, respect local sovereignty, and accept the convoy order. Neither side believes the other will yield. The confrontation turns into battle. Portuguese cannon fire is dangerous, but the Ming are not unprepared. Coastal batteries, allied harbor craft, fire rafts, massed archers, and early Ming gunpowder rockets fill the strait with smoke and confusion. Boarding actions follow, but the fight is decided by coordination more than courage. Ming and allied ships trap the Portuguese between the harbor defenses and the current. Local pilots know the waters. The Portuguese crews know they are far from reinforcement. By dusk, the Portuguese assault has failed. Some ships withdraw damaged. Others are captured or forced to surrender. The result does not end European ambition, but it changes the rhythm of expansion. The Indian Ocean will not become a Portuguese lake. News spreads quickly. Courts from Cairo to Calicut and from Java to the Swahili coast understand the message. Europe has entered the ocean, but it has not replaced the old powers. The Ming network has survived its first great Western challenge. The Ming court responds by institutionalizing the victory. Naval academies expand. Harbor pilots are trained. Shipyards standardize repairs. Maritime law becomes more detailed. What began as ceremonial power becomes a bureaucracy of the sea. Fortified bases appear at selected points, but they are not simple copies of European colonies. They function as supply depots, customs houses, convoy stations, diplomatic compounds, and intelligence posts tied to local rulers. Control is negotiated, but increasingly real. The encounter also forces adaptation. Ming commanders study Portuguese guns, hull forms, and oceanic tactics. They do not simply copy Europe. They selectively absorb what is useful, fitting new weapons and navigation habits into their own maritime system. By the mid-16th century, the Indian Ocean becomes the heart of an extended Pax Sinica. It is not peaceful everywhere, and it is not absolute. But trade, diplomacy, convoy protection, and imperial prestige now flow through a Ming-centered maritime order that Europe must work around. Global trade begins to bend differently. Spices, porcelain, silk, silver, horses, incense, and manuscripts still move through many hands. But Ming customs offices, convoy schedules, and diplomatic privileges shape a larger share of exchange. The world economy does not become Chinese overnight. It becomes harder to imagine without China at sea. The Americas are still reached. Europeans, blocked from easy dominance in the Indian Ocean, may push harder into the Atlantic, but their expansion develops under greater pressure. With fewer Eastern prophets and a constant awareness that Asia contains a maritime power they cannot ignore. East Africa changes as well. Ming-linked settlements and warehouses grow along the Swahili coast, not as total colonies, but as mixed commercial communities. Chinese ceramics, local architecture, Islamic scholarship, African trade networks, and Indian Ocean diplomacy overlap in new ways. Inside China, maritime power changes politics. The eunuch maritime establishment remains influential, but it cannot rule alone. Scholar officials, merchants, shipyard managers, coastal governors, and military commanders all compete to define what an oceanic empire should be. A more outward-looking Ming state must solve problems the historical Ming often tried to contain: private trade, piracy, coastal defense, merchant wealth, and corruption. Survival at sea requires reform, and reform creates enemies. Science and navigation develop under pressure. Astronomers refine observations for sailors. Cartographers compare foreign coastlines. Shipwrights test hulls for long-distance patrols. Knowledge becomes practical because the empire depends on it. The later history of China changes, but not magically. The crises of silver, taxation, factional politics, frontier defense, and climate still exist. Yet a strong maritime revenue system and wider diplomatic network may give the dynasty more tools to adapt before collapse becomes unavoidable. Europe changes too. Without easy entry into the Indian Ocean trade, Portuguese, Spanish, Dutch, and English strategies may become more contested and more Atlantic-focused. Colonization still happens, but its timing, funding, and priorities shift. The global balance of power becomes less Eurocentric. Beijing, Nanjing, Malacca, Calicut, Hormuz, Aden, and the Swahili coast remain linked in a system where Asian and African powers retain more bargaining room. The sea becomes a shared arena, not a one-sided European breakthrough. But empire at sea carries its own burdens. Distant depots demand money. Admirals accumulate influence. Local allies change sides. Pirates adapt. Court critics never disappear. A Ming maritime order can endure only if it keeps adjusting. In this world, the choice to remain ocean-facing prevents a simpler retreat into continental priorities. China does not become invulnerable, but it becomes more connected, more commercially flexible, and more aware that power can flow across water as much as land. The so-called Age of Exploration no longer has a single center. European ships still sail, but they do so in a world where Ming convoys, Indian Ocean merchants, Islamic courts, African ports, and Southeast Asian states remain deeply organized. Discovery becomes negotiation. The great irony is that the Ming did not need to conquer the world to change it. They only needed to keep showing up. A continuous state-backed fleet could have altered trade, diplomacy, military competition, and the imagination of global power. Zheng He's voyages were real. The world they opened was real. The alternate history begins with the decision not to let that opening close. If the treasure fleets had become institutions, the map of modern power might have been drawn very differently. So what if Zheng He's treasure fleet never stopped? It would not simply mean bigger ships or richer trade. It would mean an Asia that met Europe from a position of organized maritime strength, in a world where the ocean did not automatically become the West's road to empire. Every empire has a story history forgot. This has been Historic's Vault. More are coming. Subscribe so you do not miss the next one.